introduce jQuery to you guys. It'll be a short introduction, just what it is and how you could use it. Then we'd be going through a sort of exercise, which is building an RSS feed reader. It's a very simple feed reader. I'll be giving you a lot of boilerplate code, so you just have to fill in the blanks. So yeah, and then we could follow up with discussion on just general hacking. So firstly, what jQuery is. So the motto jQuery of jQuery is write less and do more. So it's supposed to be a fast JavaScript library that can be used to simplify event handling, HTML document traversing, AJAX interactions, and animations. So these are the four sort of main things jQuery does. Today we'd not be really looking into AJAX in the exercise, but you're free to explore that by yourselves. And the advantage it has over plain JavaScript is it makes it much simpler to do these things, as if you had to do it without knowing jQuery. So these are some. Firstly, a short quiz. So what is client-side scripting? So where does this occur? You all should be having some idea about this already. It's a sort of very basic question, but it's good to sort of revise this. So client-side scripting occurs at your client side. So your web app client is probably a user's browser, right? So what you send to that browser contains HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript. And jQuery sort of fits in the JavaScript part of that. So this is the part we'd be looking at today. So yeah. This is a sort of typical chart you'd get if you would Google jQuery usage statistics. Basically, what it's trying to say is that as of today, over half of the world's top websites use jQuery. And why is this? Well, it's free and open source, so it's also very extensible. You could write a plugin too. It's not really too difficult once you get started with it. This is one of the major reasons, actually, cross-browser compatibility. So I think except the latest version of jQuery, all the previous versions work with all browsers. In fact, even the latest version only does not support the older versions of IE. It does support the latest version. So the code you write in jQuery would work seamlessly on all your browsers. So this is also an advantage. Tends to be concise. So this is why you'd want to sort of start with jQuery rather than plain JavaScript. If you had to do something in plain JavaScript, which has a jQuery equivalent, you'd probably end up writing a lot more code in JavaScript, and you'd probably have to take more time to debug it. Of course, it's more code. So yeah, so jQuery sort of makes this this code much more concise to write, and it's sort of easier to debug for the same reason. Give me a second. So that brings us to the fourth advantage of jQuery, which is plugins. So jQuery has a lot of plugin support, both official plugins as well as unofficial plugins. So if you Google jQuery plugins, in fact, it has plugins for all sorts of stuff. It could be simple input boxes, autocomplete, things like that. So these are very easy to sort of add into your website once you get started with jQuery. So first things first, to use jQuery, you would probably have to have this line of code in your HTML file. In fact, since we have already gone through Bootstrap, most of y'all would already have something like this or its equivalent. So as Prof. Min had mentioned last week, it's good to have this at the end of your HTML page, because scripts might take time to load and you don't want the user seeing nothing while that's up. So I think we can move to the document. So most of you all should already have this open somewhere in your browsers. So we've gone through defining jQuery and a short introduction. So I'll just go through what's in this document, particularly the references and resources part. References, the first one is the jQuery website itself. This is something you'd find extremely useful while starting off with jQuery, as well as sort of exploring its functionality. Specifically, you should look at the API. So it's very well done. So anything you need with jQuery, this should be your sort of first stop. For example, if I needed to see what append function does, just go to the API. So this is typically how the API is structured, the documentation. So it'll have like one line saying what it does. It'll have a few lines about what parameters it takes in, and also has an example. So if you sort of want to mess around with what append does, you could just copy paste this into your project and modify it to suit your needs. So this should be the first sort of stop you would look at when looking at jQuery code. Yeah. Apart from this, if you have any debugging issues, you should go to Stack Overflow first. It has a very active jQuery community, so you could look at the tag jQuery on Stack Overflow, and you'd find a lot of questions and answers about it. In resources, you'd find a few resources to get started with CSS selectors, simple jQuery. This is on your own time. So if you really want to go deeper in jQuery, you could sort of do all of these. But to get started, I think after today you could just sort of see what you need and Google those things. There's this short section on tech terms, so if you're confused about something, you can get started here. So I think now we could look at how Bootstrap uses jQuery to get started. In particular, we'll be looking at nav tabs. So if you go to the Bootstrap components page and search for nav tabs, yep, that's what we need. So with Bootstrap last week, you saw how it helps style your HTML pages. But what we didn't really explore is how the interactions change, like the code which changes the tabs, right? So when you click on profile in a working Bootstrap page, so you'd see home move from active to inactive, and you see the active class being added to profile, and this would sort of move here. So this is done by jQuery, and this is done by specifically the jQuery that Bootstrap uses that you import in your web page. So you've already imported this, but you've not really looked at the code for it. But don't worry about that. We'd be going through that soon. So there's also a way to programmatically sort of change those tabs, and all of the JavaScript part of Bootstrap can be found over here. So on the Bootstrap website itself, it's under JavaScript. So you can go to nav tabs here, and they'll tell you how to do this programmatically. So this is the code. So all of jQuery code typically starts with this $, which is basically referencing the jQuery object, and then you would say I want something with the ID my tab. Notice how a hash is before the ID. That's just a way of saying that what comes after the hash is actually an ID. So if you want to select something with a particular class, you replace this hash with a dot. Say you want to select all paragraphs, you would not have any hash at all, just p, for instance. So yeah. So this is actually the markup. So this is what you'd have on your HTML page. So you have, say, a UL with class nav tabs, and you have the profile, home, messages, and settings. You saw home being active, right? So that's because the class for that list was active. So when you click on profile, what the jQuery code for Bootstrap does is remove this active class from home and add it to profile. So that's just what it's doing. So it's as simple as that. So if you had to sort of shift this programmatically without the user interaction part, you'd probably do something like this. So yeah, I think we can get started with our example now. So you could probably clone the repository. The link is here. So give you about 5 minutes to do that. Once you've done cloning the repository, you could add it to your Google App Engine launcher as an existing project. So, yeah. So what the project contains would essentially be the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript parts. It's sorted into folders. So the HTML is in a templates folder. So if you look at RSSFeedReader.html, you would have something like this. Notice that at the end we have all our scripts. There's Bootstrap. There's the one we'd be editing, which will be jQuery RSS. And this is a Bootstrap plugin. So it basically works with jQuery, so we'd be looking at that too. But mainly we'd be working with jQuery RSS, so that's all we'll be changing here. The rest of it is leave as is. We are also importing Google's JS API. We'd be using this because the RSS feeds, right, we'd be getting from by using this API. So we don't really have to do the sort of to get the feeds in a uniform form. We don't really have to worry about how it's done. So we just make a call to Google and they give us the feeds in a nice object. So this is the JavaScript file we'll be editing. You can only look at the to-do and the hints in the file itself for the tasks. But as an overview, I could probably take you through it. So first we have the Google API call for feeds. So this just initializes the part we'd be using, and all the rest of our code comes in within this jQuery document ready call. We do this because we want our jQuery code to only be executed once the page is ready. So once the HTML document is ready, because say the HTML document is loading and you're trying to manipulate say a text box on the page, and the text box still hasn't loaded yet. So it would sort of give you an error. It would say in your console that it's undefined. So all your jQuery code, as a rule, you should sort of wrap in within this function. So within the document ready function. So this is a callback. So basically what happens is when the document is ready, it would call this function. And notice that this is an anonymous function. It does not have to be. You could give this a function a name and sort of call that, say, have something like you have something within this function and you do this would work too. Okay, so you don't really need to have an anonymous function. Yeah, it's just as any other. To give you an idea of what we will be building, I could probably show you a sort of completed version. So we'll be doing something like this. So you have a text box where you input the RSS feed link, say get feed. It would add a tab for your RSS feed. You click on a tab, it shows you the feed. You also have something which sort of hides the paragraphs, shows the paragraphs. You could sort of try uh, adding another feed, and it would show up in another tab. So you have this neat sort of switching between tabs. Yeah. So this tab stuff, right, is exactly the same thing we just saw in Bootstrap. So you're just programmatically adding that part to the HTML page, okay, and that's done within these functions. So if you look at what you need to implement, right, you should probably get started from the form submit event for the RSS link form. Okay, so this is sort of the flow we should follow. Where once you're comfortable with what you see within the JS file, you could start handling the submit event and make the call to get feed with URL. Right. So yeah. So is anyone done with the submit event? So what we need to do within the submit event, right, is get what the user has typed in the input and pass it to get feed with URL.
Talking about projects, or you can do that after the presentation. It would be nice if you could give your full attention to that. Well, the first create an LI.
So you don't have to start from there. You can start from the submit event for the link form. Um, we'd get to that shortly, but you won't really be able to see anything if we added that code right now. Yeah. So you should probably scroll down to the submit event for the link form, which is this. Hmm. The dot submit, the function within dot submit. No, not really. So what this does is, right, it takes the element on your HTML page which has an ID of RSS link form. So if you look for that, right, so it's this form, okay, and when this form is submitted, it would call this function. So what you want to happen when that form is submitted is take the URL that the user inputted and pass it to get feed with URL. So it's basically this form on your page. So the user would enter a URL here and say get feed, right? So you want to extract what's here and pass it to get feed with URL, which is a function defined here. Yeah. So if you look into that form on the HTML page, right, you'd see it has an input field which has an ID of feed URL. So basically, you can select the input field with the ID of feed URL and get its value and pass it to get feed with URL. Yeah. So this is how you select elements, right? So say you want to select the input field. So you want to select something with an ID of feed URL and get its value. So that's why I asked you lookup.val. So if you see what .val does, right, that's in the jQuery documentation. Yeah. So this provides you with an example of how to use val. So basically, what you just need to take this. If you want to see if it's working right, you could try logging the value of get feed with URL in the console. So it's basically just there you go. So it's that bit of code. So if you try running this now, and say open the console, so get feed, right, you'd see it being printed here. This is because of the console log. So this basically takes what's in feed URL in something with an ID of feed URL, which if you go to your HTML page, right, is just this input field. Okay. Extracts its value and stores it in this variable URL. This is the part where I'm logging what's there, and this is the get feed with URL code which I'm making. If it's not null. So if you try inputting different values here, right? So it sort of should be okay. It's not a URL, but yeah, we printed here. Yeah. So is everyone done with this bit? Anyone who's still doing this? Okay, so now we can look at what get feed with URL is doing. So what it does is makes a call to the Google Feeds API. You don't really have to worry about this. This is sort of taken care of. So you just need to know that feed is where your RSS feed is stored, the reply you get from the Google API. So if you really want to look at what's in this field, you can say console log it, and you'd sort of see it in your log. So refresh this page and get this right. So this is the object you're returned with. Okay, you don't really have to worry much about this. This is sort of taken care of. Once you have that field, we'd be activating a progress bar, which we'll be implementing later. And if there's no error, um, this basically gets the title of the feed in your result, and you're adding a tab control and a tab pane, because we saw how Bootstrap implements the nav tabs, right? You need to have a control as well as a pane. Since we already have a working add entry to page and add tab pane, but not a working tab control because this function is empty, you'd actually see the tab being added over here. If you look at your HTML on the page itself for your app, within the body, right, you'd see a tab pane being added, but there's no control, so you can't really see it. This is all hidden from you, since by default this tab is added as hidden, and you don't really have a control to select it. So that's the next part of the exercise, which is implementing the tab control. So basically, you can just follow the to-dos to implement this bit. And in fact, the next function already has hints for it, because this is exactly what you need to be doing here. Basically, you need to add the tab control. So xkcd should sort of come up with a tab here. So in a completed app, which if you look at it, you'd see something like this come up. So this is the bit which is already there but hidden from you, and this is the bit you need to add right now. So the first to-do says create a li jQuery object. So you do that by doing something like this. This is exactly the same thing which is happening here, right? See, if I wanted to create a div, I'd say document.create element div and wrap it around the dollar sign to get a jQuery object. Yep. If I say.
The front lights, the lights.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's the screen.
So I think by just going through the code here, you can sort of make out what's going on. So could we have some, say, volunteers to explain what you think is happening here? It does not have to be correct. You just have to just look at the code and sort of guess what it's doing. Because I get to feel that right now you're just sort of copy pasting the code, right? So it's okay, but you should have some idea of what's happening here, right? So you can probably start from line 17 and yeah, go on. Any volunteers? Anyone? Come on, guys. So it's a list. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, this is an unordered list here, and this is an unordered list of your tabs, right? So what we have created is a list item here and added it to this unordered list. So initially, you had an empty unordered list already on the page, and as you keep adding feeds, right? So you get another list item being added here. So these are now two list items. So if I keep doing this, right, I keep getting list items here. Yeah. So you have a better idea of what's happening now? Yep. So basically this creates a list item, this creates a link. So your link has certain attributes. So if you look here, right, each list item has a link which has an href attribute of hashtag the feed title, and a data toggle attribute of tab. So we do this because Bootstrap requires us to have this like this. So if you look at the Bootstrap page for tabs, right, this is exactly what they have within their tab code for, like, say, if you had to pre-program these tabs, you'd probably have to add it like this. But we are sort of adding it dynamically, right? As a user enters a feed and says get feed, we need to add this manually in the code. So this is what we have been doing here. So we create this link, list item, this link, change the attributes to what we want. This is done by append, what comes between the tags. So this part, right, say feed a dot append feed title, is basically what adds xkcd here. And now we say feed li dot append feed a is what adds the link between the list item tag. And now finally we need to add this list item to this unordered list. So this is something which already exists on the page, right? So we just need to select that. So say I want to select everything which has the ID of feed master play panel and the unordered list within it. So if we look at our HTML page and say look for feed master panel, so it's this basically. This is the unordered list we're selecting. So I could have also selected something with an ID of tab controls and it would have worked just fine. So instead of this, right, we could just change this to hash tab controls and it will work fine. Right. So yeah. So we're almost done here. So we'll look at a simple example of animations now. This should be sort of more exciting probably. So if you look here, right, we have a button for showing and hiding paragraphs, but right now it doesn't really do anything. What we'd like it to do is move these paragraphs in. Basically slide these paragraphs in when you click hide, and when you click it again, it should probably expand it. So if you look at the completed application, it will be something like this. So this is something you can do really easily with jQuery. So to do that, we'd implement the what happens in the hide paragraph button click event. So there's a lot of sort of hints given here. Basically, you can look up what is does, slide down and slide up in a jQuery API. So what you basically need to do is check whether the currently active tabs paragraphs are hidden. So to get that, you just select the feed detail container, something with the class active. That's why it has the dot prepended, and P that comes after, which stands for the paragraphs. So that's essentially how your page is structured, right? You have a feed detail container within which you have a active tab class, tab pane class, and within that you have the paragraphs. So this bit is basically just checking whether those paragraphs are hidden. All right. So you say dot is hidden. So if it's hidden, it return true. Otherwise, it will return false. So if it's hidden, what you need to do is slide down. So you'd select the same thing again, feed detail container, active class, paragraphs, and slide it down. This number is the time in milliseconds it should take to slide down. So that's 400. So if you adjust this to say 2000, that would take 2 seconds to slide down. Yep. So when you do this, it automatically sort of changes the hidden attribute to be untrue. So the next time you click it, it would go here, and you'd slide up. Did anyone have any trouble? You could try changing the values here. Say make this 2000 and see what happens. Yeah, that takes forever to slide, right? So a lot of basic animation like this can be done using jQuery. So you can look up the API for more such stuff. we now move on to using our progress bar plugin. Um, if you look at the completed application, when you say get feed, you'd sort of see this progress bar appearing at the bottom, filling up and then disappearing. If we do it again, you see another one run up like that. So that's basically using a plugin for jQuery, which is this. It's bootstrap dash progress bar. So you can look up the documentation for this. This is not really an official plugin. It's not really in the plugins list, but it has really good documentation on the GitHub page. Typically, a lot of what you could use in your web app could end up like this. A lot of people have already made a lot of sort of unofficial plugins for jQuery, which you can just use as is, and this is one of them. It's pretty simple to use. To make the progress bar actually progress, right, you just have to select it and say progress bar. It doesn't really get simpler in this, right? So I think within the activate progress bar, we could do that now. The progress bar is already present on the HTML page, right here. So if I'd want to show it and then progress it, I'd say select everything on the page with a class of progress bar and show it, and then I progress it. I select the same thing again. Okay. So if I try to run this code, right, get feed, you see that. But you also instantly notice that we have a problem here, right? If I do that again, right, reload the page, get feed, it fills up the progress bar, but the progress bar stays there. And what's more, it doesn't reset the progress bar. So we need to handle those couple of things, and we can do that in dismiss progress bar in the function for that. So if you look at the to do, right, it says you first need to fade out the element with progress bar over 2 seconds, and when that's done, you can change the width attribute to 0 and the value now attribute to 0. So now we have a progress bar fading out once it's done loading, right? So okay. That's because of this function call. If we change this value here, it would essentially just change the number of milliseconds after which the progress bar fades. This function here is optional. It's not. If I remove this function, it would work just as is. Basically, we need this because we need to do something once the progress bar is done fading out, which is reset the progress bar. Because if I try to use it again, right, it won't really progress the progress bar because it's already full. If I keep doing this, yeah, yeah, because it just a fade out just hides the element. It does not really reset it. So we need to do that once you're done fading out. So that's the last bit of the exercise. So now if you try running this code, that works fine, right? Yeah. Yeah. If you look at the hint for this, it suggests a different way of doing this than the way we have done. Um, Basically, you can also use when and done to do this. So you have something like when. You can also do it like this. So when what you put between the parentheses there is done, you use this function. In this case, since fade out already has a callback for completion, you don't really need it. But in cases when the functions might not, like for example, if you have a function which is blocking, which takes time, you might want to move. You might want the actions which are influenced by that, right? You suppose you want function A to be after function B. So and function A takes a lot of time. If you just call function A and function B, you're not really guaranteed to sort of have them in order if they've been called from different parts of code. But in this case, if you add something like dot when function B is done, call function A, you're guaranteed that function A will always be after function B. So this is what this is doing. So that basically brings us to the end of our exercise. Any questions? So I think we can look over what we have done. So we have covered some basic animations with the slide down, slide up. We have done manipulation for the HTML page. So that's the part where you create the list items and the links and you add them to the page. And we have done some simple event handling, basically the submit button click and the show hide button click. So this counts as event handling. So what we haven't covered is Ajax. You can look this up on your own. So there's a good chance you might need this in your web application, especially if you're using iVary data, things like that. You don't want the page to refresh every time you need more data. You could sort of look into this using Ajax with jQuery. It makes it really simple to use. In fact, as homework, you could probably try extending this application or making your own sort of application which uses Ajax and jQuery. And also try to extend the functionalities of the RSS feed reader as it currently is. There's a lot that can be done, right? So you can sort of be creative. jQuery is pretty easy to use, I guess, once you get used to it. Also, some common problems you might run into. So this I've already discussed. So you should always have your jQuery code within the ready call. So make sure that you're doing this because if things don't work out right, it's a good chance that you are probably not doing this at the first time. Also, if you have multiple script files that depend on each other, you should import them in the right order. This is self-explanatory, right? Okay, submit button clicks. If you notice, all our event handlers for click events, right, do something like this. Say my button.click has this callback function with this which takes this parameter event. We always do event.prevent default. In fact, if you look at the submit events, right, we're doing this all over the place. So hide paragraphs button dot click function event dot prevent default. So it's the same thing which is being doing here, which you're doing here. This is because most of the time your buttons which are of type submit would refresh the page, and we don't really want to refresh the page, right? So you want to prevent the default action that that button does. So you should always do this if you're having a custom action for a button on your page. Okay, so this is something to keep in mind. If you want events to happen in order, you can use when done. But even better than that is this deferred function in jQuery. You can look this up. This makes your code rather neat. If you have a lot of nested calls that occur one after the other, you tend to have an arrowhead design in your code, where your code would be going from one level to another. It's basically not abstracted at all. But by using deferred, you can sort of organize the code pretty neatly. So you can just say which functions are allowed to execute simultaneously and which need to happen one after the other. So you can look this up in the jQuery documentation. It's very nicely explained with examples. And if you have any other problems, do post them on Piazza. In fact, even for extensions, once you're done with it, you could probably post screenshots, code snippets on Piazza, show off what you're doing. Also, if you have any other doubts, you can mail me or post them on Piazza. It's highly encouraged. But before we end, right, as a word of warning, jQuery, though widely used, can tend to slow down your website. In fact, this if you Google JavaScript versus jQuery, right, you'd find a lot of very heated discussions on various forums. We sort of get jQuery for free because we're using Bootstrap, and Bootstrap needs jQuery, so it's good to leverage that fact. But jQuery can tend to be quite slow as compared to JavaScript. In fact, in some things, it could be 10 times as slow as plain JavaScript, where you'd write more code to do the same thing, but it would be much faster in plain JavaScript. So keep that in mind. So for your Orbital app, it's probably useful to use. But if you're making another web app, right, and you don't really need Bootstrap or any of that, and you want your web app to be fast, you probably might not want to use jQuery. You might want to think about how critical the speed is. And in fact, if you're doing something very, very simple with jQuery, you probably could just do it in JavaScript and not use jQuery. So that's something to think about, because jQuery needs an import of a relatively huge file. So it's just 34 KB in the minified version, but it's still something as compared to nothing. Okay, just keep that in mind. And with that, I guess we are done. So you can stay around, ask questions. Yeah, I hope you'll learn something new, and do look at the code if you're still confused once you go back. Yeah.
I have a question. You know the progress bar, right?
Yeah.
You like hide by default. Whenever you use it, it just here and then you just slowly stay hiding again.
Yeah.
You do it.
You want the progress bar to stay hiding after it's.
Yeah. Right now it's like it's stay hiding on the screen.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'd probably have to hide this division. So if you look at the HTML page, right? So the progress bar is within this navbar fixed at the bottom of the page, right? So it has an ID of photo progress bar. So if you hide this, it would hide it. So basically, you can try doing that. So yeah, there it is. It's gone. So yeah. So I guess when you activate the progress bar, you could have a show for this, and once it's done, you can also hide this. Yeah. Any other questions?
What can you do with Ajax?
Ajax is asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So say you're making an application that uses NUS modules, and on the web page the user can request for NUS modules, and you need to make a call to ideally saying I want these modules, right? So if you don't want to refresh the page, if you don't want to take this call to the server and make the server make the call and then present a new page with the data, you can sort of do this in the background on the user's browser itself using Ajax by just making an Ajax call with that URL. Yeah. So you can also do other stuff while this is happening in the background. So once that data is received, right, you have a callback to do something with it. So once you complete, it will have a complete functions. Yeah.
Some stuff
Mm. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah, sure. Yeah. By the way, if you want to view the live application, right, it's at yeah. So you can view the completed code over here. You can also view this in a previous commit actually in the same repo you just cloned, right? The solution is in a previous commit. So yeah.